Yesterday, the mayor, along with several community stakeholders, hosted a town hall state of our city panel discussion. This was hosted by WTTW, and it was a great event. An hour and a half of audience questions, which were fielded by both the mayor as well as several other community leaders. There are two main topics I want to focus on that I thought were most pressing issues that were discussed during the town hall. So those two things were related to crime as well as housing in Chicago. When it comes to crime, it's going to be initiatives that the city is taking to reduce crime and increase public safety. And then when it comes to housing, it boils down to affordability. As we all know, affordability across the country, and in particular Chicago, are at record highs. So a lot of the questions and responses I want to focus on are going to relate to housing affordability in addition to safety. The first question related to crime has to do with the city and the mayor's plan to reduce violent crime and how that compares to previous years. So let's take a look at what the mayor had to say about that.
That violence is going down, and so we're headed in the right direction. Here's what we have to do. First of all, we have to ensure that we approach this holistically. One of the things that we have done at the end of last year, at the beginning of this year, we've expanded our care program. This is our operation that responds to mental health crises. 40% of the 911 calls that come through are mental health crises. So now we have a brand new operation where when mental health crises occur, police officers do not respond, but behavioral and mental health professionals respond. And here's why that's important. One, it ensures that there's an actual trained professional to show up to respond to the crises, but it also allows for police officers to be available for the other areas of violence that we do need a response to as well. We've expanded our detectives division, so we are solving more crimes now, which I see as a deterrent. The last thing that I'll say is, look, it's not one solution, it's and all. Right? It's a full force of government. That means we have to fully fund our public schools. We have to ensure that we expand behavior and mental health. This year, we're going to hire 29,000 young people for summer jobs. If you look at what Brandon Scott did in Baltimore, very similar investment, more youth employment, particularly from the neighborhoods where violence is most pervasive, you see a precipitous decline in violence. So it's the full force of government responding to mental behavior health, creating opportunities for jobs, and then of course building more affordable homes to create the type of economic stability that our communities deserve.
Drew Papachristos of Northwestern University, who also weighs in on the topic of crime in the city.
One of the key things is we can't pit the short-term responses against the long-term investments, and those things have to work together and in concert. So, I think Chicago's in the part trying to do some of that at the same time. In addition to trying to, as you mentioned, Mayor, solving cases, getting things done, actually the investing in these sort of community level interventions of all sorts, the care response teams, the hospital response, the trauma response, the outreach. And one of the things that's also changing is Chicago is starting to scale its community violence intervention efforts that no other city in the country is trying to do with both public and private dollars. And I think that's going to have an impact in the short term and hopefully the long term because they're going to be coordinated with these other sorts of investments and improvements.
Teresa? People might remember that a few years back we did some studies looking at youth joblessness. And one of the things that we showed is how high the rates are, particularly among young African American men between the ages of 20 and 25. And at that point it was almost 46, 47%, right, of young people out of school and out of work. And at the same time we made some connection between that and the rates of violence. So we recommended back then that there needed to be more investment in neighborhoods, in these sort of youth programs, things like summer jobs and so on. And so what we've actually seen is a decline in youth joblessness. We've seen those numbers improve by about 10 percentage points over the last few years. Now we can't say for certainty that it was all this, but I think there's probably some good, we can speculate, I think, with some confidence that the kinds of investments that have been made in job programs for young people are paying off, as well as investments being made in neighborhoods themselves to rebuild neighborhoods and the economic activity in those neighborhoods.
So with those two leaders providing their take on crime and measures to address it. Let's look at the actual numbers in the city. 2024 is going to be our most recent data. So I'm going to look at 3 different sources here. So I'm going to look at what the mayor provided. So I'm going to go to Fox 32 Chicago to look at Mayor Johnson's 2024 release stats as of the end of last year, so December 31st, 2024. I'm going to look at the Chicago Tribune's citywide statistics, and then I'm also going to look at the Illinois policy, the numbers that they derived, and these are going to be reported incidents as well as what the state of Illinois gathers on a city-to-city level. So looking at what the mayor shared at the end of last year, Mayor Brandon Johnson declared 2024 a breakthrough year for Chicago, citing a decade low in murders, shootings, and victims. The city recorded 572 homicides, and these were 43 fewer than 2023. Now, despite that, some question if the data fully reflects street-level safety. Now, while the mayor highlights this progress, these numbers only count incidents tracked by Chicago police and exclude certain killings like self-defense. Now, moving on to Chicago Tribune, the numbers that they had to share. So these numbers also come with caveats. So the homicide figures do not include killings that occurred in self-defense or in other circumstances not measured in Chicago police statistics. Homicide data from the Illinois State Police, which patrols the city's expressways, also are not included here. So just general overview here. After a 2-year spike during the pandemic and national outrage over police accountability, Chicago began to see a decline in homicides in 2022. Homicide and non-fatal shooting totals fell again in 2023, but the city was roiled by robbery and carjacking crews responsible for an overall uptick in violence. Then in 2024, the city saw a 3rd consecutive year of decreasing homicides in Chicago. So as you can see here, this graph paints a picture of where, the years that we saw dips in homicides. And then when things began to spike up again, as you can see, the trend with the spike in during the pandemic is reflected here, and then things gradually began to decline. Now, comparing 2024 homicides to 2023, Chicago Tribune reports that there were 45 fewer people killed in 2024 compared to 2023. And then it also lists out the communities where the most homicides were reported in 2024. Community areas including Austin, Greater Grand Crossing, South Shore, Auburn, Gresham, and North Lawndale, as well as Chatham, were at the top of the list. And then towards the very bottom, Beverly, Lincoln Park, Morgan Park, Portage Park, and West Elsden had the least number of reported homicides in 2024. We're going to look at the Illinois policies numbers when it comes to Chicago crime, violent crime. Now, according to this report, Chicago residents reported 28,443 violent crimes during 2024. Attacks and threats were both up, with aggravated assaults hitting a 20-year high. Now, the Illinois policy report also states that city residents reported 1,614 fewer violent crimes in 2024 compared to 2023, as cases of homicide, robbery, and criminal sexual violent assaults declined. Violent crimes have been trending upward for the past decade. So despite the decade-long upward trend in violent crime, 2024 was a year, much like the mayor had stated, where there was a decrease in crimes reported, violent crimes reported. When it comes to aggravated assaults, they hit a 20-year high in 2024 at 8,039. The more serious aggravated batteries increased 3.1% last year, the largest percentage increase for a violent crime category, for a total of 9,132. Now, if we look deeper at that 8,039 aggravated assaults in 2024, yes, it is the most in 20 years. But if we look at the totality of these violent crimes in this graph, you can see that robberies in this 20-year period are down, and aggravated battery is also down as well. Now, interesting stat here that I think is worth mentioning. During the past year, aggravated batteries consistently peaked at midnight and then reached their lowest levels at 7 a.m. So you can interpret that however you want, but those are the numbers shared in terms of the peak and then trough of these aggravated battery reports. Now, if we're looking at the totality of all the numbers and all these graphs, if we're looking at violent crimes over the 20-year period, so 2004 through 2024, they're down. If we're looking at homicides in the 20-year period from, again, 2005 to 2024, they are up. So there's a difference there. So homicides are up over the 20-year period, while violent crimes are down over the 20-year period. And then getting a little bit more granular, over the 20-year period, from about 2005 to 2024, robberies are down, aggravated batteries are down, but aggravated assaults are up. And then for completion, sexual assaults, homicides, and human trafficking levels have remained about the same since about 2005. Another question that one of the audience members posed to the panel had to do with how businesses are affected by crime. So let's hear what the panel had to say.
These are real challenges, right? As much as we can appreciate that shootings and homicides and vehicular carjackings, criminal sexual assault, violent crime continues to go down, there's still a lot more work to be done. Over the course of these first 20 months, we've attracted $20 billion of new investments. We are still the top corporate locator anywhere else in the country, right here in the city of Chicago. So there's clear attraction to do business in Chicago. Here's the approach, and this is what's been discussed, and I'm grateful that our brother Cole has been a part of this effort too. We have to provide more presence in our communities, right? And one of the ways in which I know that my block, my hood, my city continues to do that is to bring people from other neighborhoods into these neighborhoods so that people can see the vibrancy. One of the things that I believe that our main approach has been over the course of these first 20 months is that with our $1.25 billion bond investment, that whole investment is the largest investment in the history of Chicago to not just build more affordable homes, but to expand businesses, right? And so there are opportunities for us to continue to grow business, but one of the ways in which, of course, we keep these business in these communities safe is that we have to have more traffic and more flow coming in these spaces, because that becomes a deterrent in and of itself.
Now, the mayor made a connection between certain measures that his administration had taken over the last few months, particularly in the Austin community, and how that sort of translated into lower crime rates. So let's take a listen to what he had to say about that.
Though, since removing ShotSpotter technology, what specific resources have you allocated to communities most heavily impacted by gun violence? I would give you a break, Mayor, but I have to give you this question.
Well, first of all, let me just say that, again, this is my top priorities, community safety. I'm raising my family in Austin on the west side of Chicago, the best side. Look, I have a 10, 12, 17-year-old, right? This is what my wife and we think about every single day. What has to be highlighted is that the 2 police districts that are attached to Austin, let's just start with the 15th police district, we've seen a decline in every single major category in terms of violence. Austin was also the top neighborhood that hired young people. The Austin community, we hired roughly 1,700 young people from that community. Now, I know we don't want to necessarily give it absolute credit, but I will. I believe there's a direct correlation between the violence going down in Austin and the fact that we had almost 1,700 people hired. Technology in and of itself doesn't stop crime. It doesn't. It just alerts you. So what good is that in and of itself if the ultimate goal is to prevent violence? It was also expressed, we put $100 million in our CVI program. So people on
Community
the ground,
violence intervention.
community
So-
violence interventionists, these are individuals on the ground who will understand and understand the community and are tethered to the community. And so these are the investments that we will continue to make to build a better, stronger, and a much safer Chicago.
Of course, ShotSpotter, when it was in existence, was controversial, and then when Mayor, under your administration, the city chose to close that contract, it was still controversial. Andrew Papachristos, I'm going to come to you. What do we know about the efficacy of that kind of technology and how it works?
Well, I think the mayor alluded to the key point is it doesn't it's not correlated with reductions in violence. It will get people there faster. It could get evidence a little bit quicker. It's not really decisive in terms of the science of it. So essentially the question is one of the voters and one that the mayor had to deal with. But there's no proof that technology. It's how you use it, essentially. And there are other technologies that are in the city that are not being used that we could use in different ways. So I think it's fair to ask those questions.
Jamal?
Yeah, I think there's more technology on the light poles than in the classrooms. I feel like there's so much ShotSpotter technology, and there's kids don't even got no laptops or no hotspots at home. And so I think that everything we do in my block, my hood, my city is violence prevention work. When you invest in children, that's violence prevention. When you show them better, they can do better. The work we do with our block clubs, I mean, I've never run to a block club and said, thank God for this ShotSpotter technology. No, they say the more connected we are in our block, the safer we are, the healthier we are, and the happier we are. The girls getting off school at 3 o'clock, let's make sure we open up the window and make sure we're looking out for them. Like, if you see something, say something. It sounds old school, but it really does work.
Now on to a topic that really affects a lot of young Chicagoans, whether they're individuals that just moved into the city, individuals that have lived here their entire lives. That's going to be housing, affordable housing, whether it's rental properties, first-time home buyers. And this issue isn't one that's specific to Chicago. It's felt across the nation, but it's interesting to see how different cities address this issue. So let's take a look at how the mayor and several members of the panel address the audience questions when it comes to what they're going to do to really help the residents who are really feeling the pressure of high rental costs and really high home ownership costs in general.
Why is rent so high? It has so much to do with the fact that housing is based on this so-called free, but market system, right? So when it comes time to trying to develop affordable housing, for example, there really needs to be some forms of subsidies. If you're gonna do it just purely based on the market, it's not going to work. And so we need to be thinking about what does it take to provide housing subsidies. And I think also, this is something I maybe haven't thought about a lot, but it's coming to me now, is that the importance of public housing, for example, and collective housing, cooperative housing, land trusts. I mean, all those kinds of things are also ways that we can provide opportunities to get better housing. But unless we're thinking about how we're going to subsidize both the building of affordable housing as well as providing people subsidies for rent, we need to do that in the context of this market-based phenomena. And then you combine that with high interest rates. And I know one of the things that a lot of communities, particularly Latino communities, are facing is the issue of gentrification, where they're being priced out of neighborhoods because the housing stock is changing. For example, the size of that housing stock, but and then of course when you combine that, sorry, Mayor, but when you combine that, and I know this is, it's bigger than any one single thing, but the property taxes adds also to the cost of housing. And so when you add all of that together, I think that's what makes it hard. But the extent to which we can start thinking about subsidizing some of the housing development, I think we'll be able to increase our housing stock and access to affordable housing.
Okay, thank you.
Well, no need to apologize, not at all. Look, the challenge that we have in government in general, we have a very lopsided tax structure. We just do. You know, some of the wealthiest people in the state of Illinois and the country pay less of their overall income taxes than some of the poorest people. That gap continues to widen. And so we do have to address that. The second thing is we have to build more units, and we have to build more affordable units, and it has to include public housing as well. I told you all, look, I taught in Cabrini Green. My students woke up every single day with a bulldozer staring them in the face as public housing was being dismantled, and we have not replaced those units. So far, we've built more affordable units in these first 20 months, and we're going to continue to build more affordable units. And what does that look like? That's also social green housing, putting hundreds of millions of dollars into a revolving loan so that we can continue to build more units, more affordable units, 1,100 units downtown. 30% of them will be affordable. Nowhere else in the country can you say affordable housing and downtown. So the basic answer to solving and dealing with the housing challenge in Chicago or anywhere else on the planet is we have to build more units. We have to build more affordable units. We have an entire program called the Missing Middle, where we are providing opportunities for developers to move on multiple plots in a particular neighborhood, like Inglewood and North Lawndale, where vacancy is at its greatest. These type of initiatives for individuals to purchase homes, individuals to have their homes repaired, these are all programs that are available in the city of Chicago. As I said earlier, this is a frustration that I have because there are opportunities for these type of investments to actually materialize. It's a matter of making sure that people know and that they are aware.
All right, thank you, Mayor.
But housing should be a right. I mean, it should be a fundamental right. And as a society, we should be thinking about how do we provide housing? I mean, make sure everybody has access to housing.
Now, one of the mayor's proposed plans to really address the issue of income inequality in the city and possibly to alleviate some of the issues related to housing has to do with the Bring Chicago Home initiative. He discussed this specifically during the town hall. Take a look.
A cycle or two ago, we had a ballot referendum around Bring Chicago Home. It would have raised $100 million to respond to this demand. We're going to continue to still work to build more homes, but I want to lift up that effort because the interests of the ultra rich confused as well as baited voters into believing that revenue would go somewhere other than what we had purposed it for. They used the migrant crisis to undermine the interest of working people. 97% of individuals would have received a tax break on any property that is transferred over. Only 3% of Chicagoans would have been expected to pay incrementally more in order to secure the revenue that's needed to respond to this crisis. Here's what I'm asking the people of Chicago. At the point in which we go for this revenue again, let's not allow the interests of the corporations as well as the ultra rich to dictate what working people deserve in this city. We have to pass Bring Chicago Home, changing the tax code to address the real estate transfer so that we can actually generate the revenue to respond to these crises. Every issue that we are facing in this city requires investment. It's got to come from somewhere. What I'm offering as mayor of the city of Chicago, it has to come from the ultra rich, and these large corporations, in many cases, do not pay income taxes. Working people in this city have balanced the budget for decades. I'm saying there's a better pathway forward to respond to these crises if we stick together as working people, demanding that the ultra rich in this city, in this state, finally pay their fair share in taxes.
So a little bit of what Bring Chicago Home actually is. The mayor planned to use this tax hike to raise money on any purchasing of $1 million properties. And while it was touted as a way to help the homeless, there's nothing in the ballot language or from Johnson to guarantee how the projected $100 million a year will be used. There's indications that the cash-strapped city, Chicago, could use the tax hike in other ways. Again, this is all according to Illinois policy. So some basics about the ballot question. So First question is, what does the plan do to Chicago's real estate transfer tax? As you can see here, in general, it's going to lower the tax for properties worth less than $1 million, while raising taxes for properties over $1 million. Again, addressing that income inequality aspect that the mayor talked about in the town hall. Now, when you look at the actual types of properties that are going to see the biggest tax hike, a lot of them are non-residential. So over 1,000 industrial buildings, over 1,000 commercial structures, 600 commercial buildings that are over 3 stories, motels, supermarkets, and shopping centers. Now, while the mayor did bring Chicago home during the town hall, it's worth noting that 53% of Chicago voters rejected it when it was on the ballot last cycle. Now, some say that if passed, it would allow the city to raise taxes without binding the city to use the funds generated in any explicit way that guarantees helping the homeless. It also adds here, again, this is the Illinois policy, Chicago failed to spend 85% of the $52 million in federal pandemic relief funds it received for homeless efforts, and already has the $200 million in its budget for homeless relief. So before taking another $100 million in taxes, Illinois policy, poses the question, shouldn't the city examine how it can better use what it already has? And this goes back to what some are saying about how the money will be used. They're saying it might not even be used to help address the homeless issue in the city. So that rounds out the crime and rental/housing affordability elements of the town hall that I wanted to address. If you want to watch the full town hall, you can head over to WTTW. I know they have the full recording there. I'll also include it in the details of this video. But these are, great events that mayor and different city leaders hold, and I really appreciate them for doing that. I appreciate them for really fielding questions for an hour and a half. It makes the city residents feel like they're heard, and it also allows us to get a better sense of how they're thinking and where they're coming from, as well as providing context as to why we find ourselves in different situations.